Hi, Lawrence.
Hello, how you doing?
Good yourself?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good. How was it down there in Melbourne? You feeling loved?
uh, yeah, we're feeling very special.
I'm sure.
What's the meme I saw the other day? It was something along the lines of, Melbourne is the most livable city in the world. Even coronavirus agrees. Um, so it can tend to feel like that a bit at the moment with the lockdown, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I doubt that they would necessarily make a decision like that without having seriously considered
Yeah, I'm sure.
all the impacts that were going to go on there. So, how have you been? Where are you based, Sylvie?
I'm in Sydney, actually. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do this light on.
That's why I said that I better send my love to those Melbourne people down there.
We need it at the moment. I think a lot of
Yeah.
Melburnians are feeling very much the strain of it all at the moment, to say the least. So, speaking of fellow Melburnians, hello Jessica and hello Sam. Um, Hello Vel. I don't know if you're a Melburnian or not. So,
I am Melburnian, yes.
oh, there you go. There's a few Melburnians uniting today, which is good.
Because there's nothing else for us to do anymore as of tonight.
Yeah, I'm a bit of an introvert anyway, so it's not terribly much difference for me. I
True.
think, if anything, what the coronavirus has done for introverts is take away the need for us to make excuses for not going out. So it's kind of like, oh, no longer doing the whole, oh no, I've got that on tonight. It's different instead. And it's just me this week. Vanessa is off this week, so it's just going to be little old me today. It'll be interesting to see if we get many people turning up since we've moved to a fortnightly structure there. Letting John in. Hi, John. How you doing?
Good. How you doing, Lawrence?
Good. I'm good. Wearing the cool hat, I see.
Yeah.
With a strategically placed beam of light.
Yeah, I'm just
going on
about to
behind
adjust
you.
that. Yeah.
It's a very designer thing to do, isn't it? So
Yeah, it's just this time of day. It's terrible for that.
yeah, I get that. I've got a window directly to my right-hand side, and at around 5 o'clock in the afternoon during summer, it's absolutely blinding.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah. How's everyone been going? I know we skipped a week, but it feels like ages since I spoke to most of you. So it's weird how that kind of time distortion happens. But how have you been going? Jessica, I'll ask you. What's been happening for you?
Good. I had a freelance gig last week on site, which was weird because I was in lockdown in Maribyrnong.
Right.
So I caught the tram there with my mask, and I did Thursday and Friday there in South Melbourne.
There are still some places that are insisting on people coming on site.
Yeah, it was weird. They had only 3 or 4 people in the office. So.
Is it a retailer by chance?
No, it was the Ross Partnership in South Melbourne.
Oh, yeah, I know those guys, yeah.
A lot of midday stuff.
I've got a retailer based in South Melbourne, and they are in a position where they couldn't have the work go off-site. So instead, they split up the design team across 4 locations in the building.
Wow.
And got them to do work that way. So it's interesting because, when you think about it, this is kind of the new normal for now. And a lot of businesses, I think, are still putting stopgap measures in, or temporary measures. I think they think they're temporary measures to deal with this without realizing that this might not be temporary. This might be what has to happen from now on. So I wonder at what point in this journey of things will businesses suddenly go, well, we've been doing this for 6 to 12 months now. We need to reconsider how we're actually doing all this. What's the tipping point going to be?
Yeah.
That really is going to make that difference. So it'd be interesting to see.
I've seen these posters around the streets for like screen dividers for workplaces, like for office spaces. I don't know if they were a pre-existing company or they've just done a little pivot with their marketing, but it's clearly directed at the current circumstances.
I think all businesses need to pivot. I don't think there's a single business out there that needs to to just stay. Well, they probably are, but I think most businesses will need to pivot in some way in order to remain relevant. I think the other big challenge, though, is that while I think many people are going to be happy to go perhaps on site, depending, like, I mean, can you imagine working on site at something like the ME building in the city with a 2-person per lift requirement? Like, I mean, it would take you half a day to get to your office.
Yeah.
And another half a day to get home again. So I think there's those challenges that are coming up. But also I think the other big challenge is that many people are perhaps a little bit cautious about using public transport at the moment. I certainly know I am, and I don't know if that's a valid anxiety or not. But, you know, the thought of getting into a carriage where there isn't frequent cleaning and a whole lot of people I don't know, and, you know, I've got flashbacks to peak hour where it was just like literally my face in someone's armpit. It's not something that fills me with confidence about getting in and out of the city and going to work. So I think there's going to be lots more changes to come before we find our feet as what is the new normal again. That's why these groups are good, because we can discuss these ideas and see what people are experiencing out there at the moment. You know, we've got one person who has gone on site in the last week, and I know some clients phone me and still want people on site. But it's an interesting thing out there. You know, Jess, you mentioned you've been getting some work. Has anyone else been finding any other opportunities coming up for them? I tend to find that people I've spoken to are either getting dribs and drabs in, and generally through people they already know or companies they already know, or it's dead quiet for them, one or the other. What's the experiences you guys are finding out there at the moment?
Yeah, after 3 months of near silence, last 2 or 3 weeks have been extremely busy for me.
That's great. You're a really talented designer, John, so that's hardly a surprise.
Almost too busy, really. So, you know, I probably did about 4 weeks of work in about 2 to 3 weeks. I've landed a new client in New York City. So they're like a mental health startup. I just delivered a presentation this morning.
If there's a city that needs a mental health startup right now, it's probably
exactly. And I mean, especially with Black Lives Matter happening over there and all of the turmoil regarding that, I probably can't say too much about specifically what this startup is doing, but they're addressing that within organizations. I can say that much. So basically designing the branding for that startup. So it'd be very exciting work. Yeah.
What I find interesting is that we're becoming more of a global market. And that will inevitably happen with the ability to work from home and with businesses realizing that people can work from home. And it's a challenge for us recruiters, because we're still kind of wanting to work more so with people that have got the appropriate visas, not so much because of any particular reason other than it's easier for our payroll perspective. It's a bit harder when we start dealing outside of Australian law and Australian currency. But it is interesting to see, again, that this is another evolution again, I think, as businesses begin to realise. Now, just imagine what it's going to be like when businesses clock onto the fact that they can get an Australian to do their night shift for them. Suddenly that would be so much easier. And if our dollar drops to the US, that's going to be another advantage, isn't it? So it'd be interesting to see when these things start to drop into place for them.
Lawrence, do you have many observations about a precedent with sort of distributed workforces where you have 2 sets of teams working in 2 different time zones?
I know of some businesses that have done it. I actually think it's a clever way to do it. In some cases, I guess it really is dependent upon, obviously as soon as work goes off to another team, then depending on what the work is that you're doing, you may lose a little more control over it. That would be the only concern I would have is, you might have one team who's really hot and delivering great work, and then you send it off to another team. They're perhaps not as conceptual or not as experienced, and therefore the work might begin to suffer. So that would be the key thing I potentially see. Other than that, I think it would be a bit of a business nous in that sense for a company to consider how they might be able to do that.
I mean, particularly with online applications like Figma, you have collaborative workflows where everybody can even simultaneously work on projects, So, you know, you don't have to keep 2 files or 2 copies.
If there's one thing that this pandemic has shown us is how much technology can save. I mean, can you imagine what our economy would be like if we weren't able to have meetings like this and to be collaborative? I mean, we would be screwed.
Yeah.
It would be all over Red Rover. And so the fact that we have got this technology to be able to collaborate, to discuss, even just to connect with people on a more human level, is absolutely brilliant. It's fantastic. So I suppose I should actually present on what we're actually supposed to be talking about today. We've kind of touched on this, though. You know, it's kind of why I was asking these questions. And, you know, I'll come back to another thing. You mentioned that you've done like something like 4 weeks of work in 2. Was that because the client asked for that?
No, I just...
I wonder if that was budget driven or not.
No, I just had several projects land all at the same time and didn't say no to any of them because it had been so quiet. In different circumstances, maybe I would have turned one of those projects down, but you've got to strike while the iron's hot, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Right now, with us not knowing where any of this is going, I agree. It absolutely makes sense to accept whatever comes along. So, so today I wanted to talk about tips to applying for jobs, which might seem kind of ironic given what we've just been discussing in the lead up to this. However, it's kind of the natural progression from all the other topics that we've been talking about so far. And it makes sense that, you know, what we're experiencing right now in terms of how you would apply for a job is going to be different from what you would do normally. And so while, you know, I don't proclaim to have all the answers to the questions, I felt that that would be a good discussion point to have in this forum today and to be able to at least take any of the questions you might have as well. So there's a few things we'll be talking about today. I'm going to go back to that notion of being a unicorn, what the current job market is like from my observations and from what we've just discussed now, quality over quantity, being innovative, and taking some questions from there. So I do come back to that whole idea of being a unicorn, and what that came from. You know, if you weren't here for the last webinar, essentially I was talking about the fact that, you know, when we had the last global financial crisis, what happened back then was that many of the clients had to let go of their teams. And when they were at a position where they could afford to get someone back in again or hire someone again, the challenge was that they really needed 4 people, but they can only afford 1 person. And as a result, what they did is they got the 4 job briefs out. They took the most important part of each job brief. They mashed it all together into what I refer to as the Franken brief. But really what they're looking for, in other terms, is a unicorn, someone who's going to have skills across many, many things. And at the moment, the number one piece of advice I'm giving anyone who is finding themselves sitting at home and wondering where the next job is to do a bit of a skills audit and to be able to do whatever training you may need if you find that there is a gap in your skill set that helps you to become more of a unicorn. In the last presentation, we talked how to do that skill audit, but in a 25 word or less snapshot. It's really about looking at the common JDs that are coming up now and assessing if you have all the skill sets that they require, and if not, what's missing, how do you fill in that gap? So that's my starting point, is to say that right now, you know, being a unicorn is more important than ever in terms of finding a job. In terms of the current job market, let's have a look at what the current trend is. So obviously we're in a job short market. What that means is that there are more candidates, less jobs. That's a pretty obvious one that I think most of you have noticed so far. This also means that there's potentially going to be less perm initially, but an increase in freelance opportunity. And I'd say that probably what you'll experience due to budget restrictions will be a lot more short-term freelance opportunities coming up. So we're looking at a couple of days here and there on a project-by-project basis. What people really need to consider right now, and again, this is something I've been saying to everyone regardless of if they're in the creative industry or not, is that right now in this current market, it's not about sitting looking for job opportunities to come to you. It's going to be more about how you can create opportunities for yourself. And this comes back to that whole notion of pivoting that we were talking about before. You know, what is it that you do, and how can you apply that in a few different services that might be useful to people out there? The other thing is that when the permanent roles come along, it will be about the closest match. And this comes back to that whole notion of the unicorn again. As unrealistic as the JDs are going to be potentially in the near future, they're still going to want to be able to find someone who matches that as closely as possible. I had a job brief in the last week from a business who wanted to pay really low, but wanted someone that could studio manage, graphic design, expert in packaging, have a marketing background, could do copywriting, and even, you know, stepping a little bit into that digital side of things. And realistically, what they were looking for versus what they were prepared to pay was completely out of kilter. But this is potentially what we're going to be up against as we move forward. And one of the key things here is that because there's going to be less job opportunities coming up on the permanent side, it's really going to be about the quality of your application over the quantity of them that you send. So the key thing I'd really recommend right now is really about how do you make sure that what you're putting out there, what you're applying to the job, is as perfectly matched to that job position as possible. I've got a little bit of background noise there, so I might just see if I can people for the moment, because I can't figure out who it is. So I'll just quickly do that. Sorry, everyone. Rightio, great. The key thing that I'm kind of talking about lately, and I'm talking about this with clients more so, is that every job at the moment is going to be a bit like a chip in a field of hungry seagulls. And what I mean by that is that if you can imagine getting a chip and throwing it into a large field full of seagulls, that kind of flurry and activity that's going to happen is exactly the same that companies putting a job ad up are going to experience right now. Now, that could be a good reason for them to actually turn to a professional recruiter to be able to take away that flurry. But on the other side of that, if you can imagine being that person, what do you think they might need from you in order to feel that you're the right person for the role? So it might be about how do you stand out from the crowd. I think I've jumped ahead in my presentation, but that's okay. So going back to that whole notion of quality, that should be quality over quantity. Don't you hate it when you start doing a presentation and only then do you notice the typo? And the ironic thing is that somewhere in here, it's going to be about an eye for detail. See, stuffs me up every time. Anyway, take your time with each application. What I mean by that is look over the job description, match up your experience. If you can talk in terms of stories or achievements, that's going to be even more brownie points there. I think if you go back to some of our past presentations, you would have seen our MD Vicky Ann talking about what we refer to as PARS. And this is project, action, result. So being able to talk from that experiential place of, well, in my past job, I was in charge of doing X, Y, Z, and this is what I was able to achieve, is going to be far more beneficial. I've often said to people that, if you list what your job description was, that's great. It might help to match you up in terms of if you're right for the role. But talking about your achievements is really what's going to secure you the job. Utilize transferable skills where you can as well. So if you haven't got an exact match, can you think about something that you've done in your past that is similar to what it is that they're looking for? And how can you describe it so they recognize that it's the same skill set, just in a different format, a different package? You also might want to accept when you're not right for the role. And this is a bit of a tricky one, because in a sense, we're all, if you're unemployed at the moment and you are looking for a job, obviously you want to be able to apply for whatever jobs you feel you're going to be right. But if it's clearly obvious that there's a big part of this role that you don't have a skill set in right now, then you're probably best not to apply for that particular role. And if you see a theme on where you're lacking in terms of skill, then that's pretty much an indication that that's the skill that you're going to need to invest some time into learning. If you put yourself into the hiring manager's seat, and have a think about, if you were that hiring manager, what is it that you would need to see from an application in order to impress you, to make you feel that you are the right person for that role? Be innovative. Obvious point. Is your CV and folio up to date? This might sound really obvious, but I can tell you now that for someone who makes a living looking at CVs day in and day out, frequently what I'm sent is out of date, or it has mistakes in it, or it just isn't doing that person service. And we've done some previous presentations about how to fix those mistakes. Is your CV and folio on brand with who you are? Again, that's something that we've done a presentation before in the past as well. And risk versus reward. What can you do to make your application stand out? And one of the things that have been popular in recent times have been video cover letters, which might sound a little cheap or a little TikTok-y, I don't know. But the reality is that those video cover letters present a great opportunity for you to convey your personality really quickly. And, in this current climate, sometimes it's those small details that are going to help to ensure that you're shortlisted. Attention to detail. So I knew it was going to pop up, and I knew it's going to come to bite me on the butt again. This comes back to quality over quantity. So go over your application. Is there spelling mistakes? Please do a spell check. Do the URLs actually work? Are they hyperlinked so that people don't have to try to copy out a massive URL in a PDF in order to see whatever the work is? Is your layout looking professional? Does it reflect your brand at all? These are the small little attention to detail things that really help to give a smooth experience for the hiring manager in order to determine, if you're going to be the right person or not. And as I got there, in this market, the smallest of mistakes could see you not being shortlisted. So for the sake of doing a spell check, for the sake of figuring out how to hyperlink a URL in a PDF, for the sake of making sure that your layout looks good, and kerning and leading and all that sort of stuff, just take the time to do that. Any questions at all? I've kind of raced through that at a frantic pace today, and I haven't seen any chat questions come through, but if you wish, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions or offer any insight or wisdom or examples of your own experience. Or else I'll have to do interpretive dance, and you don't want to see that. That's really bad.
Yeah, Lawrence, thank you very much for that. I find that a lot of the time they're asking for a lot more nowadays. Mm-hmm. They want everything.
Yep. It comes back to that Franken brief that I was talking about before.
Yeah. And how you over... It's kind of like they're trying to put 3 roles into a role.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And that's essentially what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And obviously it's a cost-saving thing, but how do you... I guess, like for me, I don't have the UX and UI digital. I'm a corporate graphic designer. So it's a lot of in-house and, brand guidelines and style guides and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite restricted with my creativity, but I still, a lot of the role, they're still asking for a lot of video effect or UX and all that kind of stuff, which pretty much I don't even apply for them anymore, because it's kind of like I don't want to be taking all that time to research and to apply for a job, and if I'm going to be rejected or not answered anyway. Mm-hmm. So how do you overcome that that kind of market where...
Yeah. My first question is, are these things that you're interested in learning?
Yes. I mean,
that wasn't a very convincing response.
No, it's not.
You weren't overly making me think, yeah, he really wants to learn.
I love it, yeah. UX and UI for me it's too much back-end kind of stuff. I kind of like a different, I don't know, it's just me as a person, I guess. But I'm upskilling to doing, I'm doing a marketing degree, mm-hmm. only because I've got a lot of experience and lots of people are kind of like you don't see a lot of graphic designers that are over 50, and I'm 50. So it's kind of like I'm trying to do a career transition as well with the skill sets that I have. And I think marketing, because I like communications and sales, and I have the good eyes for obviously designs. That's what I'm kind of thinking of doing. But UX and UI designs never really. I've done it at Combank, you know, I've worked for Combank and all those big banks, but yeah, it's not what I like to do.
I think ultimately it comes down when we look at this and put it into a crossroads situation, you really come down to one of two options. Either A, you don't go for any of those jobs that involve those skill sets, or B, you maybe do some really basic training around it just so you can get some understanding of it. If that's going to be enough or not is a completely different story again. But at least kind of determining if this is, you know, sometimes just doing a really basic course, which you might be able to find on something like FutureLearn or something like that, can give you some further insight into if this is something that's actually going to be of interest to you or not. I think I read recently that statistically people are more likely to go in different directions during with their career during these kind of economic downturns. So what you're doing isn't necessarily uncommon. However, when we break it down into kind of a binary situation, you know, it's kind of either you go for these jobs or you don't go for these jobs. And if you don't go for these jobs, that's fine. That's okay. It just means that you are narrowing down what it is that you're going to be good at. If you do go for these jobs, then it's about what's missing for you in order to be able to do it.
But I mean, you still got to get like a lot of people won't employ you if you haven't got an experience in that field. Like it's good to have a degree or to have, I guess, some training or webinars or workshops. I mean, I've got e-learning on LinkedIn, which I do a lot of courses through, but it doesn't, even if you put that in your resume that you're keen to learn about it or you've done those workshops. A lot of people won't waste, they just haven't got time they want to have the full package with everything nowadays, I've noticed.
Consider this, if someone advertised a position and they've basically gone through 4 job descriptions to create the one job description.
Yeah.
How many of those people do you think exist out there?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. No. So what do you think that means for the job? It means potentially that job's going to be sitting there unfilled for a little while, isn't it? Unless, in another crossroads situation, either the client sits there and doesn't fill the role, or they fill the role with the closest match possible. And how do you become the closest match possible? Well, you start to fill in those skill gaps. It comes back to the initial point.
Yeah, to be a unicorn.
How much do you need to fill it in? That's a big question. I don't know. You know, is a basic understanding of something going to be enough to satisfy that need for a client? Do you remember when digital first came out, how clients just put every single digital requirement under one title? Like, videography and social media. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's all digital. And it was their own lack of understanding that meant that they were trying to find these things that were essentially 2 different roles.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's about even asking, you know, if you are lucky enough to get a client, well, how much of each do you need? You know, what's being used in this area? What, you know, it comes to UX, why is that a requirement here? How has it been used in the past? What's it being used for now?
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't think I've really answered your question. And, you know, the reality is that there's no, despite the fact that I'm going black and white with a lot of my questions, there is no black and white response to this situation. It's going to be lots of taking it case by case and looking at the client. I'll
have to be a very colourful unicorn.
Yes, exactly. Complete rainbow spectrum. Go for
it. I will. I might as well.
It is Pride Month after all, so let's do it.
Thanks, Lawrence. Oh, wine. Okay. It's a bit early.
What can you say about the hidden job market? I keep hearing the most jobs are to be found here. What's the hidden job market? Is Sandra here? Oh, there you are, Sandra. I like how do you remember the character Fu was like a nose sitting on a wall? There you are. Hey.
Kind of hidden. Hi.
What's the hidden job market? I don't think I know that.
That's
Yeah.
the call. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I keep hearing a lot. Even like ages ago, I was speaking to a recruiter. This would have been like last year, and they said to me, "Oh, don't just apply for jobs that are advertised like on LinkedIn or on Seek. A lot of them are not advertised." Like she was
Right.
telling me, 80% is the hidden
Okay,
job
right.
market. But
I
like,
get
how do you access that apart from networking? Like, I don't know.
Well, sadly, the answer is networking.
Okay.
So I get what you mean. It's like, how do you... This is what I'd recommend to you then. I would recommend you think about the top 10 companies you would like to work for.
Mhm.
And do that list. And then what you generally do is figure out, either in that case, you can go to a recruiter and say, do you have a relationship with any one of these 10 clients would be the first point. Because if they do, and it's a warm relationship, and they can say, yep, I think that you're a good match for that, then you're doing each other a big favor. So that'd be the first thing. They're going to look good for presenting someone who matches what the client might look for, and you're going to get in front of the right person straight away. If they don't have that relationship, and you're not wanting them to go and do that research for you, you basically need to find who might be the right person to speak to and reach out to them and say, I'm sure you're inundated with requests at the moment. Would you mind looking at my folio? Or, something along those lines to try to build that engagement.
Thank you.
I think that would be the best way to do it. You're right. In a lot of cases, what I'm experiencing right now talking to people is that the people that are getting freelance jobs are generally getting them through their existing networks.
Mm.
And that's to be kind of expected in this current climate at the moment, where there's still a lot of uncertainty about where things are heading.
Yes.
Yeah. John, to what degree is remuneration impacted by the current circumstances? Are employers recognizing that it's a buyer's market adjusting remuneration downwards? Oops. To be honest, as a recruiter, a lot of our permanent opportunities were placed on hold back when we went into the original lockdown. From the companies that I have been speaking to lately, I think that they're offering the lower end of what might be acceptable. And I think they're doing that cautiously. And again, there's two parts of me that are in conflict here. There's part of me that would think as a business owner, I get it. And then there's another part of me that thinks we don't want to drag wages backwards. I don't think businesses are doing it because they see it as an opportunity to get in someone cheap. Okay. I think that they're honestly, that is their budget right now. So I don't think it's necessarily them being cheeky or trying it on. But I think it's also too early on to see where this is going as yet as well. I'm hoping things would stay at least static.
There's a second part to my question.
Yep.
I guess you can read it.
I was wondering who was going to read it. That's why I was pausing.
Yeah.
With the above in mind, when job applications ask for a desired figure for salary, is it better to aim slightly lower for fear of being automatically excluded?
Or can you give a wide range?
Question. That's a really good question. I would. It's a hard one, isn't it? It's risk versus reward in that scenario. Mm-hmm. You could go in. I guess it really depends on how. You're kind of faced with a challenge here. You could put forward what you're looking for, but kind of indicate that you're flexible. But then by indicating that you're flexible, is that giving the client permission to say, no, I'm not going to pay that, I want lower?
Yeah.
So it's a bit of
what I've been doing is putting a range, and it's been a wide range to hopefully not sell yourself short, but show that you are flexible.
What about this? What if you put a range, but put an asterisk next to that range that says, depending on the responsibilities of the role?
Yeah, okay.
And that way you're kind of saying that there's a range here, but it's also dependent upon what level of risk. Because, the more senior you go, the more you're going to potentially have the requirement for conceptual skills or mentoring juniors or being client-facing or all those other criteria that should naturally increase the salary.
Thanks, Lawrence.
No problem. Critty, what do you think about entry-level UX UI design roles? Everyone is looking for more experience. I think if you can get them, great, because to be quite honest, UX UI is kind of, it's the hot thing at the moment. And so I think anything that gives you an opportunity to get more experience in that area is going to be potentially a good thing. It really depends, I guess, on your individual circumstances and what it is that you need from a job in order to make it something that you can do happily and that it is able to keep you comfortable, whether it be your mortgage or rent or utilities or food. Food's good. I like food. So, those sort of things need to be factored in as well. But if those opportunities come up, I would generally say to people, if it's where you're seeing yourself going, and it's certainly where I see the industry going, there's a lot more integrated design, I think, coming more and more forward, then that would be a good thing to explore.
I think I mentioned in a way that I am looking for entry-level roles, but any job that's advertised is for seniors or mid-level roles.
Right, I get what you mean. How do you get the experience in order to do that?
Chicken and egg situation.
Chicken and egg. Yep, cart and horse. It's a hard one, isn't it? I think in a lot of cases, if you're not working right now, you could do personal projects, but make sure that you clearly label those personal projects as such and not commercial work within your folio. They can often be a good way to cement the learnings that you have, as well as showing clients what kind of direction you might go in with your UX and UI work.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. You could also approach, if you wanted, you can approach some organizations that are not-for-profit or something and see if there's a possibility of doing some project work with them. Most of those places cannot afford to pay people. But if it's an organization that is aligned with your personal values and you're happy to do that, then they might say, yeah, we'd love some assistance.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence.
No problem. Any other questions at all? No? Hopefully this has been valuable for you guys today. I don't know if I've offered anything that's been brand new for you, but hopefully it's got you thinking about different ways in which you might be able to apply.
Lawrence, are there any particular industries that you're observing slightly positive trends for in terms of there being jobs, whether it's certain in-house roles or studios that deal with certain markets? Is there any anomaly to be found amongst the bleakness? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Oh, that's such an optimistically phrased question. Thank you for that. Not often you have bleakness.
I've seen some bleak diagrams today.
If you can work the words despair and void into the next one, I'll give you brownie points.
For some context, Lawrence, one of my friends on Facebook has a group, and it's called the Doomed Economy Support Group. So, the sort of metrics and diagrams in that group reflect the focus of that.
I don't mind. If it brings a smile to my face, then it's all good. No one particular industry has jumped forward as yet. I know that for us personally, we do a lot of work with government, and that's been quite beneficial because, regardless of if the economy is going well or not, government needs to communicate. And when you throw a pandemic in on top of that, even better. And like many of you, we keep an eye on job boards too. And I think many people have noticed that there's been quite a few government opportunities coming up on job boards recently as well. So I think they're probably some of the more stable ones. And to be completely fair, some of the work that they do is actually really, really good. I think that there's often some good possibilities and opportunities there. I think corporate in-house is probably another area that we're seeing coming up more and more. It may not be the most fun or sexy or type of thing you want to necessarily spend all your time in, but I do see them as being the ones that are coming up a little bit more now. But keep in mind that this is skewed because, as I said before, a lot of the design studio and advertising agency clients that we would normally work with would potentially have their own network of people that they've turned to in the past. And the reality is that many people are sitting at home, literally, if they're in Melbourne, sitting at home waiting for opportunities to come in. And so it's not like there is necessarily a fight to find good talent. A lot of design studios that will generally go to a recruitment agency only when their existing network is not available. And right now, a lot of those networks are. So it's hard for me to give an honest evaluation about what those industries are doing, because I would suspect that they're going to their own existing networks in the first instance. I think even you've experienced that yourself, haven't you, John?
Yeah, I've had a few smaller projects come through just through word of mouth and personal networks. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I think that from a lot of people I've spoken to, that's kind of what they're experiencing at the moment. In terms of how long this is going to take and where it's going to go, anyone's guess is as good as mine. I think some of us have been through an economic downturn before, but none of us have been through an economic downturn with a pandemic thrown on top of it. It's kind of a different spin on things. But I think that's where, exploring how you can do your work differently is also going to be beneficial. And it also comes back to what we were saying, going full circle at the very start of this conversation about how, a lot of businesses are putting processes in place that they think are stopgap measures. But how long does this continue before we realize that these are no longer stopgap measures and that they need to think about something more permanently that's aligned with our new normal? And that might have a shift again in terms of what kind of employment needs they have and how they engage people and where they are. So, do you know much about Boolean search for jobs? Asks Sandra. I know what a Boolean search is. I generally associate that more with Google searches and things like that. So you would be saying things like, graphic design plus permanent plus Melbourne minus freelance or something like that. So I don't necessarily use them as such, but you might be onto something there. Who knows? It might be a good way to have a look and see if things do come up from doing that type of search. I'm not even sure if I pronounced it correct. Is it Boolean or it's anyone know? I've always assumed it was pronounced Boolean, but it could be pronounced something completely different. Might be French. You might call it Boulier or something. I don't know.
I think it's Boolean.
Boolean, thank you.
But don't quote me on it.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm gonna my next quote I'm gonna put on LinkedIn. John Citizen says it's pronounced.
No. Have some angry SEO people emailing me.
Yes, exactly. Any other questions at all? No? Awesome. As I said, I hope that today's been useful in some way, or at least in getting a completely transparent and honest insight from a recruiter about what the industry is like right now. I've certainly not held back in terms of being completely honest with you there. But hopefully that also helps to either normalize the experience that you're having right now and recognize that what you're experiencing is what all of us are experiencing. And at least to come up with a few different ideas as well. You know what, in all honesty, sometimes it doesn't take terribly much to stand out from the competition. I've spoken about this before in one of the other webinars, but I remember back when I was looking for a junior graphic designer that had catalog experience. And I put the ad up, this is about 2 years ago, and I had 100 applicants. And of those 100 applicants, none of them had catalogs in their folio. And so I sent an email back to all of them saying, thanks for your application. As the job ad clearly states, we do need catalogs. Given that it's a junior role, I can understand you may not have had that experience, but if you wish to do a personal project and show me what your catalog would look like, if it comes back right, I will put you forward. Of those 100 people, one person bother to do it. Which goes to show that it really doesn't take much to stand out from the crowd. Just to add that little bit extra, or to just, consider what it is that's currently missing that might make you stand out a little bit more in terms of that particular application. And it did surprise me. I thought that I did actually get a letter back, or an email back, from someone who was insulted that I'd asked them to do a personal project for a catalogue, even though it would be what they would end up doing day in, day out as the job. So go figure. But, I think that story always serves to highlight how little it takes to just add that little bit of value and stand out from everyone else's application. And we need that more than ever, given that, if I was to put that job ad up right now, I don't think it'd be 100. I'd be getting 300 or 400 applications, which means that my time to look at each is going to be down to, sadly, seconds if I want to be able to do anything with my day. So, yeah, things to consider.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, look, I'll let you go then for today. We are doing fortnightly. If you haven't seen all of the webinars and you're interested, jump onto Facebook and look for the Creative Recruiters Virtual Meetup group, and you'll find literally all of the webinars in there. There's been some really fantastic ones to date, largely when I've asked someone else to do them, because the guest speakers are really awesome. But, there's certainly been things there about, updating your CV, updating your folio, personal brand, all that sort of stuff. So definitely worth going back and having a look at them if you have the time at the moment. Other than that, it's been good to see many of you. Sylvia and Jessica, John, Sam, good to see you. I haven't seen you in ages. Sandra, Critty, Val, Basil, Alex, good to see you all. So we'll see you hopefully in a fortnight's time.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. See you later.
Richard Lawrence.